And I had a wonderful career in public education, and we need to get back on the right track. Second to their health, the most important thing is the education for children, because it's what helps determine their successes. And most importantly, materials that we teach, besides our methodologies that we have to focus on, they need to be age appropriate and grade appropriate. Children need to have conceptual development. And if they don't have that, the material is meaningless. And from what I'm seeing when I look over the standards, when I go into individual local districts and look at the curriculums they've posted, these are not age appropriate things. Young children in kindergarten and first grade, we're worried about them making a straight line, walking through the hallways, learning to capitalize the first letter of their name. These are the things that we need to focus on, not gender identity. The terms and the definitions I look at, they're right over their heads. Plus, I also feel that these issues are not for the teacher to address. These are issues that should be addressed at home. As a teacher myself, I do not feel qualified to even go near these. And I'm not saying children don't have issues. They do. They should be addressed, but they should be addressed by trained certified professionals who know how to deal with these issues. They're very sensitive in nature. They're very complex, and it does not belong in the classroom.
Thank you, Kathy. Thank you, Kathy.
Sure.
Okay. Hopefully you'll stay around also for questions. Next up is Eric Simkin. Eric, I'm saying you're from Voorhees Township. Please tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi, and thank you for having me. I did prepare a formal testimony that I would like to read. I think that parents all over the state really need to understand how we can unpack and deal with these issues. My name is Eric Simkin. I am a lifelong resident of New Jersey, and I currently reside in Voorhees Township in Camden County. First, I truly want to thank all of you for having this hearing. Unfortunately, there is a pervasive perception among many parents of school children that state elected officials are not listening to the public and that we are being left out of the system rather than being part of the system. As far as I know, this is the first Trenton generated meeting with the grassroots addressing the issues of health standards. So once again, I thank you for this opportunity and ask that you continue to do so. And I ask that the chairs of the Joint Committee of Public Schools, the Senate Education Committee, and the Assembly Education Committee do the same. To say that communications currently coming out of Trenton is confusing is an understatement. On May 9th, I attended and testified at the Senate Education Committee hearing regarding Bill S-2481, Transparency in Health and Sex Education Curriculum Act, which requires, according to the bill, boards of education to solicit public input on sex education curriculum, set standards for curriculum delivery in subject areas, and requires boards of education to post curriculum plans online. For a bill that loudly boasts transparency, I found it to be anything but transparent. First of all, a copy of the full text of the bill was not available for the public to read before the bill was railroaded through the committee by the committee chair who sponsored the bill. So cogent public input by parents and guardians, which the bill claims to engage and address, really could not be made in a very productive or meaningful way. Interestingly, all the positive positions taken on behalf of the bill were made by lobbyists representing various well-funded education groups. One lobbyist praised the bill's transparency aim. How can that even be when the bill's language itself wasn't presented before the hearing or heard by the committee? I believe I was one of only a few parents there who testified about the bill. My bill was based solely on the very general description of the bill that was presented by the Senate, by the state's legislative's website. My testimony's basic point was that the standards are set by the state and that the curriculum review committees on the local level is not true transparency or deliberative, since the curriculum must follow the state standards. Senator Michael Doherty tried to ask many questions and tried to voice concerns about the bill, but the committee chair, Senator Gopal, shouted him down. This was not productive and once again raises issues of transparency. It appears that there will be committee amendments to the bill regarding various issues, such as having local districts post sex education curriculum to their websites and other issues. But the bottom line is that S 2481 does not address the issues that many parents want to be addressed, and that is the standards. The bill is misleading in having parents believe that they have a say in what's going to be taught in their school. But in reality, those decisions are made by the state standards and not the local districts. S 2481 is basically a diversionary piece that attempts to make parents think they have a say in the health standards and other issues with their school board of education, when in fact these decisions are made by the State Board of Education in Trenton. Most recently, a press release was issued by Senators Ruiz and Gopal to say that they are partnering with an organization called Jersey Can to help parents understand how the public school system works and how they can get involved. They have created a program called Parent Champions for Strong Schools. This program is to provide comprehensive training and tools you can use in school advocacy actions. While I'm sure there will be quite a bit of information shared, it does not address the real problem of Trenton not listening to the constituency. I believe it to be another tactic that redirects parents away from the issue at hand. This is deceptive. The issue is the standards, and they need to be readdressed. The standards are readdressed by the State Board of Education every 5 years. We don't have 5 years to waste on this issue. The standards need to be addressed now, and the State Board needs to do town hall meetings to hear what the parents have to say. There's no reason why the State Board has to be pinned down in Trenton with meetings during the day when most parents are at work. There's no reason why the State Board can't meet during an early evening in the North, Central, and South to hear why parents are concerned and what they are thinking. The NJEA has pegged parents as extremists for voicing their opinions on the health issues and other issues confronting our public school system. For years, parents have been asked to get more involved in their child's education. Now that parents have gotten involved by standing up for our children, we are labeled extremists. The NJEA held a 4-day conference on July 4th through July 14th. The title was Teaching is Political, Advocating and Organizing for Social Change 2022 Summer Collaborative. This is a 4-day workshop convention being taught by the Radical Pedagogy Institute. Google it, I kid you not. And they are exactly what their name indicates, right down to their resource materials that explain how math is racist. Math. Again, I kid you not. We are dealing with massive.
Yeah, we have time constraints because we have other guests that also have time constraints. So if you can wrap it up, because then we'd like to ask you a few questions and we'll go on from there, please.
Okay, well, I can assure you that based on my personal dealings with our local Board of Education, Voorhees Township, Camden County, they have a similar viewpoint of parents who speak out against them in any manner. I'm running with 3 running mates for Board of Education Voorhees, and we are standing for what we know is right, and we will never back down. And lastly, I will leave you with this. We do not co-parent with the government.
Thank you, Eric. First, I do want to agree with you about the bill that's up right now. It's a smokescreen. Being transparent about a lousy curriculum doesn't make that lousy curriculum any better, does it? I do have a question I'd like to throw out, and then my colleagues, I'm sure, have some questions as well. It's really, you really can't opt out of a class because the curriculum is metastatic. It's throughout the entire school grades as well as throughout each age. So it's K through 12. So would a better way perhaps be opting in versus opting out? And even that, because of the fact that it's woven in through all the entire curriculum, how do we do that, or can we do that?
Let me jump in, Senator. I think opting out is probably the last thing you should be doing. You have to start, it starts at the local level. Do what my Board of Ed did, do what I did. Do a resolution that you're not going to teach it in the schools, the sex ed stuff. If you create a resolution, get that written into the curriculums, the resolution written into curriculums that you're not teaching it. That's the only way to do it. Opting out, like you said, it's going to be sprinkled out throughout the curriculum, throughout the the school year. They'll do it under the radar. So it has to be within, you have to do resolution. So you're not going to do it. It has to start at the local level, and parents have to speak up. I think Andy had mentioned that they're threatening. I think it was the communications director of the state come out and said, we're going to cut funding if you don't do this. Well, to me, that's extortion. Now they're thinking they're coming after the Board of Eds by cutting funding. They're actually going after the children doing that. And they're going after the teachers who have to fork out money every year to pay for supplies. Now they're saying they're going to cut funding because we're not doing what they're saying in teaching our kids about anal sex, oral sex, and masturbation. It's completely absurd. So back to your question about opting out, that should be a last resort because nobody's going to opt out and they're going to put it through. Even opting in, how about not making the time and spending money on a class or anything like this? Let's put that money towards something else, towards teaching kids math, teaching kids science and history, the right history, not the changed history. That's it. Thank you.
I think, yeah, I agree with you as far as it's a misnomer to think you can either opt in or opt out. Again, because it's so metastatic throughout the curriculum and throughout the ages of the children. Honestly, got to chuck it, throw it away. A question, Senator Corrado.
Just to follow up to what you said, the school boards that have been vocal and adopted the curriculum, adopted resolutions opposing the new standards. Have you heard from anyone from the Department of Education?
I don't know, and I can't speak for, we're the first ones. Garwood was the first. My resolution was the very first one. I can't speak to it. Let's just put it that way, because if I say something, they're already trying to get me kicked off the board. I'm just telling you flat out. They're trying to get me kicked off. They're trying to get it removed because I started a domino effect. And if they get me removed, they're hoping that the 17 other school districts that followed me are going to also change their mind. So there's pressure on our board to rescind the resolution because they need to indoctrinate our children with this nonsense.
Thank you.
Great. Senator Testa, any question?
I do. I really appreciate Mr. Piaruli's comments and everyone's comments. But, to Mr. Piaruli's point, I've said this from the very beginning that if these materials were shown to your 8-year-old child by a neighbor, they would be charged with a Megan's Law offense. Why is it then okay for the schools to adopt this into their curriculum and force it to be taught to your children? To Ms. Stanzione, I'm a proud product of public schools as well in the city of Vineland, and I really appreciate your insight as a now retired teacher in the public school system. It really disheartened me during the budget hearings when the Department of Education said that, they didn't hear any negative commentary in the public portion for comments. Look at the state of New Jersey now. I found that to be absolutely laughable. How many people know how to log on to a hearing for the public comment portion for the curriculum that's going to be adopted in our public schools? And what's even worse about this 15-second commercial from the NJEA, to Mr. Simkin's point, and thank you for being the South Jersey representative so far, Mr. Simkin, is that, when I went to public school, it was encouraged for all of the parents to be involved with their children's education. They wanted parents to be involved in the PTA. They wanted parents to be involved in extracurricular activities. Now this reeks of, if taxes are your issue, New Jersey's not for you. Well, if your children's education is your issue, then New Jersey's not for you. It's mind-boggling that this is actually being said by the largest teachers union in the state of New Jersey. And I'm so thrilled to have such an astute panel represented here today to say, parents have had enough, and that parents are not okay with co-parenting with the government. So thank you so much for being here.
If I could just address that, Senator Testa, you are absolutely right. We have done a complete 180. I was PTA president when my children were in middle school, and it just so happened they were revising the health curriculum. And I was asked as the president to gather parent volunteers. We met over several occasions. The district provided us with all the materials that they let us review, and they asked for our input. What we thought was inappropriate, they took out, and we ended up having a curriculum that everybody was happy with. I was on the IRS team for over 15 years during my tenure as a teacher. We couldn't even discuss a student unless the parent was notified. A child who's at risk of retention, you don't retain a child unless you discuss it with the parent and you make a mutual decision. I don't know what happened. This is just, it is completely foreign and antithetical to what education is.
Thank you for those comments. And you know, and what you just said about being the president of your PTA was exactly how it's supposed to work. There was actual transparency, not this shoved in at the 11th hour where no one else could see it in the middle of a pandemic to be adopted by, you know, the curriculum. And then the ultimate in quid pro quo that if you're not willing to adopt this as part of the curriculum, you're going to lose funding. You know, I'm a criminal defense lawyer. Where I'm from, that's called extortion. You know, you're not allowed to do that. But apparently it's okay if the Department of Education does it. So thank you.
Thank you.
Senator Shapiro, do you have any questions?
Yes, first off, thank you to all of our panelists. And I think one thing that we also need to focus on in all of our schools is not only what the curriculum is that's adopted by the Board of Eds, but also what are the ancillary resources being utilized? What are the websites that kids are being directed to? What are the links? What are the books being used in each of the classrooms? And I know there's been a big debate and controversy in a lot of our schools regarding the appropriateness of what books are available at what ages. And I think there's this kind of false narrative out there that somehow, some way we want to ban books. But I think it's something that parents are actually more focused on. You know, some of the books that are being put forth are very sexually explicit in passages and texts and a whole host of things that is not appropriate for an 11 or 12-year-old to be reading, regardless of the additional messaging within the book. It may be more appropriate for somebody who's a junior or senior in high school, but you know, and I think there's a lot of misinformation about some of that stuff as well. But one of the bills that was working its way through the Senate, and this is why it's so important for board members, parents, everybody involved in the school district to follow what is coming down the pike on the NJLEG website with respect to curriculum. There was a bill that was up for a full vote in the Senate that got stopped in its tracks because of some of this backlash that would have mandated for the State Department of Education to identify only certain vendors for all of our textbooks, take away all homeschool from our local boards, that you would only be permitted to use certain textbooks moving forward that the State Department of Education deemed to be inclusive enough of material and different concepts, and would have taken away the rights of our local school boards to actually use textbook vendors moving forward. And I just want to ask if any of you guys were aware of that and what your thoughts are on that.
I was not aware of that. And it frightens me that the state would have that kind of authority over a local school district. I mean, look, the concept of home rule for local school boards has been eroded over decades of legislature. So we have some things in our control, but not an awful lot, and especially when it comes to the learning standards. I think, Parsippany's tact, at least the members of the school board who were also opposed to implementing the sex education curriculum, was to carefully implement it in a way that wouldn't have us in the sights of the Department of Education, because we don't want to be there. And to Senator Testa's point on extortion, they're very clever on how they would withhold funding. So school districts are evaluated with something called a QSAC, or Quality Single Accountability Continuum. So the state would just simply come in and evaluate our standards and say that we're missing the mark on certain things we should be teaching. So they're going to do it in a way that's very insidious to withhold that funding. So I'm just looking at a book. It's Perfectly Normal. I'm not going to show it. It's for grades 10 and up. But if I were to show you the illustrations in this book, you would be appalled. And this is for elementary students. I don't think it's in place in New Jersey, but it is in place in other parts of this country. And this is what we're faced with. Our kids experiencing this kind of material outside of the parental relationship that they have. and parents aren't even aware of what this is. And I forget who raised the point about ancillary materials. Boards of ed approve textbooks and curriculum, but there's a whole lot that we are absolutely not aware of. And those ancillary materials, as well as the point of view of teachers instructing our students, we don't have great insight to that, and it's very difficult to gain that. So we can have a very good curriculum, but we're not sure how it's being taught. And it's another way we're not in the classrooms to see that. So you have to trust your administration that they're actually not only implementing the board's policies and its wishes, but they're doing it in a way that meets the morals and values of the community. And I think there's a big miss there.
I have a final question for Mrs. Stanzioni. Because you're an educator for, I assume, many years, where did we go wrong?
That's a good question. I think we've slowly eroded parental input and involvement. We live in a society where we have, both parents have to work. So there's not as much involvement. And I really think the school districts are, I don't want to say to blame, but they're the ones that need to spend the time to reach out. The home connection is our biggest issue. And it's difficult. And, as a teacher over the years, yes, I interacted with many parents, but I also had difficulty sometimes getting in touch with them. So I think there's that connection there, and it's incumbent upon the district to make sure that the parents are involved in this. Every district is unique and has its own needs. There is not a one size fits all. Depending on where the district is, the demographics, and the diversity. You come from, I taught in a very diverse district. My children grew up in a very diverse district, and I feel we did an excellent job. The school I came from, my elementary school was one of the top 50 in the state. So I'm just going to pat myself on the back for that, and everybody else who I worked with, and the administration there too. My children, 2 self-sufficient, productive adults who can stand on their own 2 feet. So again, there's the connection between home and school. And I think that needs to be fostered more. The connection is being severed, and it's being severed deliberately, I think. They don't want parents involved. That's why we need to bring attention to all of this. And that's one of the reasons why I am going to run for Board of Ed in my local district as well. I see what's happening, and I am very upset. It saddens me to see what's happened to public schools. As I said before, and at the risk of repeating myself, we were number 1, and we worked hard at being number 1. And we turned out, we're very successful with our students. Our 4-year education rate in colleges and high school graduations. And we need to get back to that. But I think the key to getting back to it is parent involvement.
Like Senator Tester, some of my heroes were teachers, the parents of immigrants. If it wasn't for education, I wouldn't have achieved the things that I did in life, including my profession, which was a dentist. I cared very much about my teachers. I held them up to high esteem. I can't say that now. When you have the leadership of a group of people that I felt strongly for, telling parents that if you go against what curriculum standards are, then they're extremists. For a parent just trying to be a parent, what do you think teachers, if you can look introspectively, and this will be a final question before we get some of the other people on the panel, where do you think teachers went wrong? Kathy?
Senator
I'm
Eric.
sorry, I thought you were
Eric has
talking
his
about
hand raised
Senator
as well.
Testa. I'm sorry, where did teachers go wrong?
Yes. We
I don't know
heard
if they-
we need more parental involvement. We get that. But it seems that the organization is fighting the parents instead of working with the parents. So,
Well, but you need to
Must be
separate the
good.
teachers from the organization. The ideology that is proposed and put out by NJEA it doesn't necessarily mean that the teachers agree with that either. I, for one, did not. And I know many of my colleagues didn't, but that's all you're hearing. And that's all you're seeing. This actually goes back to the point, I don't remember, I think Andy, you made the point or that they're forcing teachers to belong to the union. That's no longer the case. As of 2018, the Janus decision came down from the Supreme Court. Teachers do not need to belong to NJEA anymore or any union. But they don't promote that. They don't get that information out there. So the fear factor that they've been placing with parents with what's going on in the world and is the same fear factor that they choose to promote with teachers. And we need to educate ourselves to understand what's going on, what our rights are, and what we can do ourselves to help ourselves.
Final question, Senator Testa.
Senator Panaccio, I just want to recognize Eric Simkin. He has his hand raised. So Eric, please.
Yes, sir. Eric?
Yes, thank you again. I wanted to add that although I agree that the sex education standards are a nightmare and a problem for parents and children everywhere, I will tell you that that's the tip of the iceberg in the 2020 learning standards. Diversity, equity, inclusion, that includes gender theory and anti-racism in every single area of curriculum: math, reading, science, social studies, language, and arts. There's no way to opt out of all subjects. It would be impossible. I do want to give also credit to Middletown in Monmouth County, as I believe they're the first district in the state that did require an opt-in. Lastly, when it comes to the conduit between the schools and the parents, and when I say parents, I mean legal guardians. I know that that can include a lot of different types of people, not just parents. But when you go to speak, you have a 3-minute time frame. Oftentimes, the solicitor of the Board of Education is gaveling you down. The president's gaveling you down. I've been to about 7 to 10 local districts board meetings, and they are all run similarly. There needs to be an oversight of how these boards are operating, conducting themselves, because they do not follow policy, statutes, or laws.
Thank you all. I appreciate it. I think one of the things that positive things that has happened throughout this whole curriculum mess is that the Mama Bear and Papa Bear has awoken. And you can see that people are attending those meetings. People are running for the school board, and people are getting interested and getting involved. Thank you very much. Up next, we have a physician, Dr. Meeker, Meg Meeker. We also have a research scientist, Irene Erickson, and they're going to tell us a little bit about the science behind what's going on and whether it benefits or hurts our children. So first up is, we have that, I just see one face there. Do we have Irene or Dr. Meeker?
I was on mute. I'm Meg Meeker.
Good,
I'm not
Dr.
Irene.
Meeker, you're up.
Yeah, I'm a pediatrician.
Good. You're up, Dr. Meeker. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your academic credentials, and where you stand on this issue.
Sure. I'm Meg Meeker. I'm a pediatrician, adolescent medicine doctor. I've been practicing for 32 years. I've written 7 books on parent-child relationships. In the late 1990s, I began studying sexual activity among teenagers and the sexualization of kids through media and our culture, pushing back against that. I am certified by the American Board of Pediatrics and a fellow of the American Academy of Pediatrics, and on staff at Michigan State School of Human Medicine as we have medical students and residents in our practice. I'm currently practicing pediatrics. This topic is a very, very important to me because I have seen the other side. I have seen the disconnect between what's being taught in the culture, what's influencing our kids, and what's happening in reality behind closed doors. And the disconnect is striking. I have also seen the infiltration of in medicine of the separation of the parent from the physician. So in other words, 13, 14 years of age, when a child is that age, we are encouraged to boot the parent out of the office, out of the room, and have a one-on-one talk with the child that is really talking about invasive language, very much like you're having in this in the school district. So I'm used to dealing with this and pushing against it. What I have realized in 32 years, however, is that the parent is the child advocate, and they're going to be the child's advocate for life. And the teachers are going to come and go. So when you present material in a school where the teacher presents it, which is counter to what the parent is saying, the child, you have this tension between parent and teacher. The child is forced to choose who they're going to believe. And the child will always choose the parent in the long run, which puts the teacher in a situation where the child is not going to trust them over the long run because they're saying things that are contrary to what mom and dad say that. My second concern is that when you introduce concepts to children as early as kindergarten and first and second grade that are beyond their cognitive capacity to incorporate and assimilate, it does psychological damage because these are the early years when children are learning to evaluate the world around them. What is a tree? Does the sun go up? Does the sun come down? And they're learning these concepts, and they're forming an opinion about what life is about and what is reality and what is not reality. In other words, you're in the second grade. Sam walks into the class. He's got pants on. He looks like a boy. You say there's a boy, and the teacher comes along and says, well, no, you could be wrong. And the child begins to doubt themselves. They begin to doubt their ability to recognize the world around them and form opinions about what is true and what is not true. So that's very damaging to a child's psyche. So the big problem here is you're introducing concepts around sexuality and gender identity that are far beyond the child's ability or maturity cognitively. And when you do that, it's traumatizing to a child. It adds confusion to a child. It makes the child doubt their ability to reason. And this sticks with them for life. Anybody who has ever been told by a teacher in the 5th grade they're stupid, you're 35, you think you're stupid because it sticks, because it's a psychological and emotional issue. My other concern is teaching kids about sexuality, gender identity, sexual activity at an early age. Traumatizes the child because they not only understand, they're seeing it taught in a vacuum. And kids know that sexual activity, sexual orientation, and gender identity are more than just an activity or thought. They know that intuitively. Sexual activity, masturbation, so forth, it's not just like going to the bathroom. And they know that, but they're not being told the whole story. As far as getting to the 8th grade and talking about oral sex and anal sex, teachers are not taught the medical data. You pick up any medical magazine, and anal sex and oral sex are taught as high risk behaviors. They are damaging. When a child or an adult participates in anal sex, it's going to be, there's going to be a source of tension with other people. It's high risk behavior. The incidence of getting disease through anal sex is at least twice as high as through vaginal sex. Teachers are not taught that. So teachers are teaching, according to the medical community, about a very dangerous high risk behavior that can have lifelong consequences. Some would argue that sexual activity at 8th, 9th, and 10th grade is as dangerous or more dangerous than smoking cigarettes. Because if you smoke a cigarette in the 8th grade and then you stop in 9th grade, your lungs can recover. If you start having sexual activity in 8th grade, 9th grade, or 10th grade, and you contract HIV, that's going to affect you for the rest of your life. Or herpes, which stays with you for life. Teachers are not taught this. So this isn't just a moral and an ethical issue. It's a very serious medical issue. And I've written a whole book, Your Kids at Risk. I wrote a whole book on the effectiveness of condoms in combating these infections. And the bottom line is, and I testified at a congressional hearing around 2000 about the reduction of cervical cancer and how condoms don't adequately protect against that. You're going to have teachers teaching 8th graders and 9th graders that anal sex, oral sex is just another sexual behavior that a lot of people choose. And it's okay as long as maybe you protect yourself. That is medically inaccurate. And I don't believe that's ethical for teachers to be teaching kids things that are medically wrong. And teachers aren't being trained about this. And so and again, I think that we're teaching concepts about gender and sexuality and sexual orientation that are beyond a child's cognitive capacity to understand what this has to do in the context of their whole life, how to assimilate this into them. We're also teaching concepts to children who are pre-pubertal. So you teach about sexual orientation to a 4th or 5th grader who doesn't have sexual feelings and is not engaged in any kind, doesn't understand what sexual activity is. They don't have the ability to figure it out. You know, am I bisexual? Am I gay? Am I straight? The other one, the other point I want to make is this, because I've spoken to thousands of kids about sex over the years, spoken in arts academies, very liberal academies. Children, teenagers feel tremendous pressure to identify, to label themselves as straight, gay, or bi before they graduate high school. This is a tremendous pressure. And so what they're finding is that their identity, the most important part of their identity, is not who they are as a human being, but who they are as a sexual being. So there's a disproportionate teaching about self-worth and value as a human being put on sexual identity and gender, which trumps the identity and value of yourself as a human being. And I believe that value as a human being is more important than your value as being a sexual being. Your sexuality and sexual identity are part of who you are. But when it's taught as being the sum and whole of who you are, the most important part of who you are, we're misleading children and we're psychologically really damaging them for life. And that's just the beginning of how I feel. So.
Thank you, Doctor. Please hold on. We want to hear from Ms. Erickson, our researcher, and then afterwards, hopefully, you'll hang around for a few minutes, and that way we can ask you some questions. Okay, Irene Erickson, please tell us a little bit about yourself, about your credentials, your academic credentials, and how you feel about the issue.
Thank you. Can you hear me well?
Yes.
Okay, it's an honor to be here. It's an honor to be on panel with Dr. Meeker. I have such high respect for her. I'm a senior research associate with the Institute for Research and Evaluation out of Salt Lake City. We've been evaluating sex education programs for 30 years, including many federally funded studies. I was one of 6 national consultants to the landmark CDC meta-analysis of sex education effectiveness that was done in 2012. My colleagues, Dr. Stan Weed and I, have had an article published recently reviewing the effectiveness of comprehensive sex education, or CSE, worldwide. And I've presented these findings at the National Academies of Sciences, the Department of Health and Human Services, and the UN Civil Society Conference in the last couple of years. So I'd like to share 3 points with you today. The first is that there's a certain amount of smoke and mirrors science going on in sex education research. For example, the claim is made that CSE, which we could also think of as contraception-based sex ed, CSE has been proven effective. You'll hear that all the time Yet when a credible scientific lens is used to examine studies that were designed to test the causal impact of CSE, and that means experimental or quasi-experimental studies.
Could you just
C-
define
uh,
CSE, please?
CSE, comprehensive sex education.
Okay.
That is sex education that focuses on sexuality, on contraception. It's the thing you're talking about that teaches oral, anal sex, that teaches that you can have these kinds of sexual contacts safely using condoms, and you know, that there's no value judgment about you know, having sex as a teenager, as long as that you know, you've got to get consent and use a condom, and those are the two, you know, requirements. So I'll use the abbreviation CSE, but that's what we're talking about. So the claim is that these programs have been proven effective. But when you actually look at studies designed to test the causal impact, which is what we have done, the evidence disappears. So it's like a smoke and mirrors thing. They tell you this, but when you actually look. So for 30 years, there have been few positive long-term effects for the target population and more negative effects than you've been told. I could go on about that. The CDC meta-analysis I consulted on found no statistically significant reductions in teen pregnancy or STDs and no increases in teen condom use that were attributed to school-based CSE programs or caused by school-based CSE. So my second point is that we have examined the recent Goldfarb and Lieberman review of CSE research, and we found similar problems, this smoke and mirrors kind of problem. Now, this CSE, or this Goldfarb and Lieberman study, I don't know if you're aware of it, but it's being used widely now to justify some of the trends that you're fighting against. Sex education for kids in kindergarten. They're saying that it prevents, you know, dating violence and bullying and all these things, okay? And that it can reduce child sex abuse. So their study claimed that they showed that CSE should begin in the early elementary grades in kindergarten, and that it can reduce child sex abuse, dating violence, and bullying at school. Yet the vast majority of the papers cited as evidence for these CSE effects were not studies of comprehensive sex education or any type of sex education. They were studies of other things like classroom discussions, children's story hour, school drama programs, musical performances, media campaigns, and violence or sex abuse prevention programs. But all of these are programs whose content and methods are very different from CSE. Equally important in terms of this Goldfarb and Lieberman study, most of the evidence cited did not meet scientific standards for evidence of effectiveness. There were very few experimental design studies that measured effects lasting past the program's end. And many of the papers were based on inadequate sample sizes, some as small as 15 or 20 kids, which is not acceptable. Because of these fatal flaws, the Goldfarb and Lieberman paper does not show scientific evidence that CSE is beneficial to children in early elementary school, or that it can reduce sex abuse, dating violence, or school bullying. And just, I want to be clear, there were no scientifically credible studies of the impact of sex education on young children. So its effects are unknown. This is important because it means that subjecting little kids to sexual content in the classroom will, in essence, be experimenting on children. Okay, so that's important to know. There's no evidence about this, so they can't tell you that it's been shown to be effective and that it should happen. Finally, Goldfarb and Lieberman appear to have a vested interest in their own findings. Both are contributing authors of the so-called National Sex Education Standards. These are the ones developed by SICUS, and their study endorses these standards, interestingly. And Goldfarb is the author of 2 CSE programs or curricula, and therefore stands to benefit financially from a study finding strong support for CSE. it's interesting that one of the programs that Goldfarb is an author on has very, very kind of graphic and, controversial content like what you're concerned about. One of the lessons for 12th graders, I'll just quote here, describes bathing together and mutual masturbation with a boyfriend or girlfriend as, quote, important because these behaviors can help build connections between people without any risk of STDs. This was in a lesson for 12-year-olds. I'm quoting from it. I've been on their website. I've seen the curriculum. So in my view, this is not appropriate at that age, and it's not appropriate at any age. So finally, my third point is that there are good alternatives to CSE. Our published research review included the more recent studies of abstinence-based programs, and there appears to be better evidence for these strategies than for CSE in the US. Internationally, we don't have enough data, but in the US, there's more evidence of real effectiveness and fewer harmful impacts. And finally, research shows that involving parents in this kind of education increases its effectiveness. So thank you. That's what I had prepared.
Well, thank you again both for coming in and sharing your wealth of knowledge with us. I just have a couple of points, and I just throw it out there. Perhaps you can enlighten me. Part of the premise for the bill that included diversity, equality, and made this all happen was under the premise that young children have an unconscious bias. So could you share with me, are there any studies out there that would show a young child as young as 4 or 5 having an unconscious bias where this type of curriculum indoctrination would be necessary in order to reprogram that unconscious bias? I'll just open up to both of you.
Meg, you're muted. Yeah.
Can you explain what they mean by unconscious bias?
No, I cannot.
Okay, I don't think they
That's
can.
the point. The point is that
And-
part of the premise of the bill was because children have an unconscious bias, they want to right that wrong.
And I would throw back to them, and so do they as adults. However, I believe that genetics is important in kids. And I believe that genetically, kids there's a genetic component of communication with the brain that says, I am a girl and you are a boy. And that is reinforced by their parents during those first 5, 6, 7 years of life. And that will not change. That will never change. It's a genetic issue. It's a biological issue. And it will always remain the fundamental teaching of parents. I also wanted to bring up another point that Irene and I come from a background of physical and sexual health. Our purpose is not to come in and say children should be bi, straight, gay, or whatever, or moralizing or philosophizing. Our job, my job as a physician, is to make sure that I keep children disease-free, that I keep young girls from getting cervical cancer. So mine is a medical standpoint, and I can show you that introduction of comprehensive sex ed in children and talking to children, 8th graders, about, oral sex and, vaginal sex leads them to potentially very high risk for getting diseases. So that's our bias.
I'll just add, in terms of your question about studies showing bias in young children, I'm not aware of any. There are, quote unquote studies or papers quoted in this Goldfarb and Lieberman that, where a teacher goes in and reads a storybook, an LGBTQ storybook to kids, and then they have a discussion, and then the teacher reports it was a good experience. The kids were very open, and this is in like third grade or even younger, but that's not a study of, of anything. It's not showing cause and effect. But here's something that's interesting. In the Goldfarb and Lieberman paper, they actually talk about this because they make it clear that they are concerned that they want to get to kids when they're young to change their attitudes about sexuality and sexual. So they say, let's see. The early grades may be, in fact, the best time to introduce topics related to sexual orientation, gender identity and expression, gender equality, and social justice before hetero and cis normative values and assumptions become more deeply ingrained and less mutable. Children learn gender role attitudes at an early age from observing the people in their families. It is important to introduce concepts that would disrupt stereotypical and harmful biases related to gender and sexual orientation during this formative time. So what they're telling you is this is their clear agenda, is to get to kids as early as possible to shape their views about gender orientation, sexual orientation, this cis-normative thing, heteronormative. And so, it raises the question, who decides what is harmful bias? Who decides which biases are harmful and which aren't? Well, not parents. They don't want parents to be doing that because they're concerned that they need to get to the kids early because their parents are influencing them in the home, in the family. And I thought that was just kind of stunning that here in this supposedly, scientific paper, they come right out and tell you what their agenda is. It's really very clear. So.
Thank you. Senator Corrado, do you have any questions? Senator Testa?
Thank you, Senator Panaccio. Dr. Meeker, you used the word genetics, and I'm glad that you used the word genetics because I think all of us agree that DNA are the basic building blocks of all of us as human beings. And, those of us that are on this panel often get accused of being science deniers. So by using the term genetics, do you mean that you actually want us to recognize actual science and follow it as well?
Exactly. Children aren't a blank slate, which is what the argument is for the other side. In other words, I can take this child and I can influence their bias and I can change who they are, how they think. And if I change who they are and how they think, I change their behaviors. My argument is, and any parent would know this, a child comes out with a genetic predetermination of their behaviors, their thoughts, their actions, the way they walk. And we know that studies on infant boys versus infant girls show that there's a difference in how they, their interest in looking at things. For instance, if you take a mobile and a person's face and you hang it above the girl will focus on the person's face. If you hang it above the boy, the mobile and the face, the boy will gravitate towards looking towards the movement of the mobile. So children are born with these inborn propensities that you cannot change regarding how they see, how they perceive the world, and their personality. So they are not empty slates. And it's funny because the other side is sort of saying they are and they aren't. They're born with a bias, and that bias is all programmed by the culture. Genetics doesn't play a part. So we need to shift that bias. But everything in medicine says, no, children have a genetic component that determines, look at a mother and a daughter, they may walk similarly. Their tone of voice may be similar. Their hair color is similar. Their body stature is similar. And so it's completely unreasonable to think that genetics would affect every part of the person except for their intuition and their thought process and their cognitive development, because clearly genetics, you'd think it was common sense, but medically, we can prove that genetics has a profound effect on every part of the person, including the way the person perceives the world from the time they're born.
Thank you, Dr. Meeker. I know we have to move on. I just have one more point, and this point is for Ms. Erickson. From the Goldfarb and Lieberman paper, and I want to read this because it's a quote. Children as young as preschool age not only comprehend, but can openly discuss subjects as varied as gender diversity, gender nonconformity, and gender-based oppression, making it the ideal time to begin creating a foundation for lifelong sexual health. And the quote also extends to waiting until 8th grade algebra to first introduce the subject of math would be absurd. The same is true for sex education, says Goldfarb. I mean, I think that's a complete logical fallacy. Obviously, comparing sexual education to algebra in 8th grade. What are your thoughts on that? That's 1A of my question, and 1B is how much has New Jersey curriculum been influenced by both Goldfarb and Lieberman?
Okay, so the Goldfarb and Lieberman do not have scientific evidence for what they're claiming about, this being the best time and that it's important to get to these kids early to influence them. There have been no studies of this because it hasn't been happening. You have to have something happen. You have to have a sex education program being taught to, 5-year-olds in order to study whether, what the impact is. And we just haven't had that. So one of the points I want to make is that we just don't know either one way or the other. I'm not saying that we know that these, this would be very harmful for kids based on studies, because we don't have studies of it. The kinds of information Dr. Meeker's presented that's developmental and that's, about cognitive, capacity and that kind of thing. There is a lot of evidence for that kids aren't ready, for that. But, these authors, this Goldfarb and Lieberman, so what this curriculum that that she has helped to write has, lessons on, in kindergarten, the Princess Boy for 7-year-olds, graphic lessons identifying male and female genitals and their functions. Lessons for 11-year-olds, where they teach them to say someone with a vulva instead of girl or female, someone with a vulva. In, lessons for 11-year-olds. Let's see, that was that. There's a lesson that directs 11-year-olds to a website called sexetc.org that has stories on the homepage about masturbation and transgender men getting pregnant. So I'm just saying to you, this is more about their agenda than about the evidence. This is about what they want to have happen. They have a lesson in 7th grade for 12-year-olds on how to decide whether you want to be in a sexual relationship. For 7th graders,
So Ms. Erickson, your comments essentially say that there's been no peer-reviewed studies on this issue. This is their hypothesis, and the experiment that they want to conduct is on our children.
Now,
Am I
let
correct
me be
in saying
clear.
that?
Well, they have presented this study they've done. It's been published in one of the premier journals of, medical journals, the Journal of Adolescent Health. It's a sham because most of the studies they cite, 80%, are not studies of comprehensive sex education programs. So you can't claim that you've got evidence for CSE when most of the studies are not studies of CSE. And in this particular topic of child, early childhood sex education, there are no studies. There are studies of child sex abuse prevention programs. And some of those have had some positive effects. Whether they've actually prevented sex abuse, we don't know, because that's hard to measure. But those programs are very different from sexuality education, the kind that they're proposing, where they, I mean, this lesson, 6-year-olds, they have a lesson, a graphic lesson identifying the genitals. This is for kindergarten, I'm sorry, for 5-year-olds, identifying the genitals that, quote, most boys have and most girls have. So they're teaching 5-year-olds that you can be a boy and not have boy genitals. You know, you can be a girl and have boy genitals. At 5 years old, there's no study that tells us whether that's beneficial for 5-year-olds or not. We are just shooting in the dark. We're experimenting on our kids with that kind of material of content for 5-year-olds.
Thank you so very much. Thank you, Senator Tester. Senator Shapizi, we'll round up the discussion on with you.
Thank you so much. And I think one of the biggest issues that we're grappling with in the state is this all or nothing approach, where if we don't accept, you know, what the Goldfarbs of the world and Amaze.org and Advocates for Youth want at the earliest of ages, that we are not being supportive of the LGBTQ community. And one of the things that we're trying to put forth is how to be supportive for children who truly are part of the LGBTQ community without having to inject sexuality into every subject at the earliest of ages. And under some of the new protocols in the state, sexuality is being put forth in every topic, whether or not it be math or science or music or art, and as young as kindergarten and first grade. And so one of the questions that I have, for our panelists are, has any research or any studies been conducted on, the impact of societal influence as opposed to genetics on LGBTQ youth at these very early stages, as well as, do you have to have actual sexuality put into every topic to be supportive of youth, or is it better to just focus on teaching children to be kind and accepting of one another rather than have to over-sexualize everything?
My answer would be you should avoid bringing in sexuality into things, because from a medical perspective, when you begin talking about sexuality, you can't unhook it from sexual activity. If you teach 8th graders that, oral sex, vaginal sex, anal sex are on the table, and that's really, then what you're saying is those are okay options, and they're not dangerous, and they're very, very dangerous. The bottom line is, from a medical standpoint, an infection standpoint, and we know that infections are related to cervical cancers, esophageal cancers, laryngeal cancers, and many other things, that from an infectious standpoint, beginning to teach children that sexual activity is acceptable and okay is not only dangerous, it goes against every medical good research paper out there that says sexual activity is not for kids. No physician could come forth and say it's not dangerous from an infection standpoint for a 16-year-old to have sex, with or without a condom. So the message for LGBTQ trans is that sex is not okay as a kid. And nobody can argue from a medical standpoint that that's not a true statement, because sexual activity, which is the result of all this teaching, right? You talk about gender, you talk about sexual orientation, and so on and so forth, is leading kids to form an opinion about sexual activity. And if you lead a child to believe that sexual activity as a teenager is safe medically, That's malpractice.
So there's no medical reason why we should
No.
be having to teach children
No.
who are 10, 11 years old about
Well,
pansexuality.
It's dangerous. It's
Yeah,
because
and
we have all the medical evidence to show that it's dangerous physically for a child, a 16, 17, 18-year-old to have anal sex. That's indisputable. But this is the part that's been left out of all of this education. It's medical data. It's all sociological, psychological, behavioral, but there's no incorporation of medical risk and benefit.
Right.
I would just add that in terms of your original question, I'm not aware of studies that look at the impact of, on young children of these, different messages and things. I am aware that there's quite a lot of evidence now that the transgender trend is looking like social influence is having quite an impact on it's skyrocketing for teenage girls, the rate of transgenderism. The curve goes like this, and in about 2015, it goes like that. So there is social influence that happens. But I would just say that in terms of prevention programs like, bullying and sexual health, the abstinence programs have always kind of had the position that abstinence is equally good for heterosexual and gay kids. In fact, there may be some evidence that gay kids are more at risk for exploitation. And so it's equally protective for all teenagers to abstain, no matter what their sexual minority or identity status is. And likewise, an anti-bullying program can be effective across the board for all kinds of bullying, including the ones related to sexuality, without a hyper focus on sexuality. So I think that there is not necessarily evidence that you need to really hone in on these sexual issues, anyway, that's.
And last question, and I am greatly appreciative for you guys being here. There is, this simultaneous push that parents need to be taken out of the equation, and that engaging with parents by the schools, whether or not it be on transgender issues, LGBTQ, sex education, that parents are inherently the bad guys, and that it's detrimental to the emotional and psychological health of children who may identify a different way, for schools to engage parents in those discussions. Are you aware of any studies or research or efficacy of those arguments being made?
Well, sex education studies show that parent involvement, the programs that have parent involvement, where they assign homework for the kids to go home and talk with their parents about the topic they discussed in school, and that have evening meetings for parents where they come together and are given, in support and instruction. Those are more effective programs when they involve parents.
I would also just throw in, it's an older study, but it's fabulous, is the Ad Health study, which looks at what are the major influences in a child's life that affect positive behavior. And by far and away, number one was the parent, and number two was a teacher. So that shows that the parents have the power to help their child choose healthy behaviors over teachers. And so that's why we need parents involved in decision-making about behaviors and beliefs that have lifelong consequences.
Thank you.
That's a very clear, well-known study, so.
Thank you, Doctor, and thank you, Ms. Erickson, for your very insightful testimony. Now, before we go on to perhaps maybe the most important group of witnesses today, our parents, there's a short video that we'd like to play for you, just a few seconds.
We don't agree on everything in New Jersey, but we all agree that our kids deserve a world-class education. So when extremists start attacking our schools, that's not who we are. People who only want to fight to score political points should take that somewhere else. We don't agree.
Thank you. Now, we have three parents, and Charlotte Cologne, we're going to give you courtesy of going first. I know you have time constraints, and we don't want to keep you too much, but we understand that what you have to say is very important. And please tell us, are you an extremist or not?
I am not an extremist, and I had a lot of paper here to go through, but in the interest of time, and to also, as my friend Sal likes to say, you speak from the heart, and it gets the message across a lot better. I was not going to do this. I was not going to say who I was and my background, because I can't stand it that it seems like what your ancestors did or your parents is now like earns you brownie points in this life. But there's something that needs to be said. I'm an immigrant from Puerto Rico, grew up there, came for college. Depending on the sun and how my melanin is working, my tone might be a little lighter or a little bit more, brown. So it depends what category I fall into. I am married to a man that grew up in Paramus, is very fair, and my children look very fair with curly hair. One is blonde and the other one that will come in November, God willing, who knows? So when I learned about the bill coming out about diversity, equity, and inclusion, my heart went to my throat. I'm really not even surprised about this, because when I was in college, and this is dating back to early 2000s, even into my grad years, this was as hot as it could be. To talk about diversity, to talk about equity and inclusion was the best thing. And if you were a Latin person, you were a minority, you were immediately deemed that this is beneficial to you and you must agree to it. And if you were not, then you were deemed you're white and you're not really that much of a minority. So when I saw that it was coming down the pipe to my potential kids' school, it was troubling. I already severed my ties with public school because I knew that it was not even public schools anymore. And I hope I don't offend anyone, but really, we in my household like to call it government-run schools. They stopped being public schools a long time ago. And we made the sacrifice to put all our children through Catholic school. Now, my worry at the time was that they were gonna push this down everyone's throat, even Catholic schools or private schools. Long story short is that I can't imagine what my child is gonna be told that my husband has inherently an oppressive behavior towards me. What is my son gonna think of my family? Or his grandmother, my mom is white, blue-eyed blonde, and my father is more dark. But that is disgusting. I didn't leave my country to come here so that I could be facing this type of reverse racism. And I have a call to the state legislature and the governor, where I say to them, you cannot legislate your way out of intolerance, racism, and just pure evil. That's a matter of the heart and in the soul. We can teach kindness and respect in the classroom. When it comes to the LGBTQ and however many other letters keep adding to that mantra, a human being is a human being, and we treat them as such. Whether or not in my household that behavior is accepted or not, that's none of anyone's business. Just like one of the doctors was quoting that the source of their research wanted to debunk traditional family. Well, I was taught that when I was in Syracuse University in the early 2000s. The patriarchal society wanted to just get completely destroyed. Right? Women that stayed in the household were deemed like you're backwards. What's wrong with you? Men should now stay in there. That's no one's business, and no one should be judged accordingly. But because this is in vogue, and also I want to go even further, Google it. You can get a degree in diversity, equity, and inclusion now from any of the major universities. And you can get a degree and get a job, well-paying job, being a DEI officer in a company or in the government. And what is it that they are? It's a modern day Gestapo. You're there doing what? Making sure that if anyone were to say, hey, I am not for equity, I'm there for equality. I don't want everyone to have equal outcome. I'm not for that. That sounds too communist, too socialist for us. Then you're deemed like you're not abiding by the morals and values of that company or the government that you're working for. Now this is infiltrating to the young ones so that people like me that were brought this up when I was in my early teens, early 20s, now you don't know any better. You don't know what equality is. You don't know the pursuit of happiness. The only thing that you know is that everyone has to have the same outcome. Everyone gets a ribbon, right? We've all heard of that. Everyone gets a ribbon. I want the government to get off my back and off my family and my dining room table. I want the government to respect that if we've chosen to live in New Jersey and we pay our taxes, and mighty high that they are in Bergen County, and then we decide to also choose, because as we're having this hearing, one of the things that I want to exhort parents, your child going to kindergarten, to third grade, fourth grade is not waiting for the legislature to take action and Murphy to wake up. You have in September to make a choice. Do you send them to your public school hoping to God that the teacher they have will respect you? Or you make the hard choice of homeschooling or sending them to parochial or whatever private school is within your morals. That's a financial cost. And we bear it with a happy smile, and we have to cut costs left and right. But that has to be said, that the choices that families are given in New Jersey are slim, and you're making families strained economically. That's not fair at all. And the other side that I want to tell you all, I have a fellow mom here, Amanda, who will speak after me. She's also representing Emerson and Bergen County. In our June 8th meeting, where we were presenting the curriculum, aside from being a total sham, one of the first things out of our superintendent's mouth was, well, you must be a racist, to one of our fellow parents. That is despicable, that even it would be uttered. And the fact that these folks can get away with it is horrific, horrific. So as much as we can present, and I applaud you, Dr. Meeker and Dr. Erickson, the other side always comes back with some remote study that they want to back into. We were told our kids would be more likely to be abused, sexually abused, if they didn't know their body parts. We were told that there is high incidency of suicide among LGBTQ students, and if they're not confirmed in the school by their peers that this is okay, then they would commit suicide, and ergo we would be liable for that. That we're in some way promoting their way of feeling ostracized. So all that I'm trying to say here is that the other side has as many arguments as we can come up with. At the bottom of the day, the tentacles of Trenton are going everywhere. We can see it with how DEP is growing. We can see it everywhere. Enough is enough. And to the parents, how many houses have I knocked on? And they say to me, Charlotte, I'm scared. I don't want to be ostracized. I left my country because I don't want my children to be ostracized. I don't want my children to be deemed like the ones that, don't like the gays or don't like this, or, what is that? Enough is enough. The parents need to stand up. We're putting our neck on the line. My kid is not going to Emerson Public. God forbid, one day I cannot pay that tuition. Look what will happen. Educate, not indoctrinate.
Thank you, Charlotte. You had mentioned Amanda Riccardi is also from Emerson. Amanda?
Hi all, how are you? Thank you for inviting me. I am
I
going
just can, Charlotte, if you can, if time will allow you, we will save our questions for the next speaker, after the third speaker. Please, go ahead, Amanda, I'm sorry.
No problem. Thank you for inviting me to this panel today. My name is Amanda Riccardi, and like Charlotte said, I am a parent from Emerson, New Jersey. I hold a full-time job, but if you were to ask my children what my job is, they would tell you my job is to keep them safe. And I hope that one day that they understand the lengths that I go to make sure that they know how far I've gone to make that happen. The new comprehensive health and physical education sex ed set forth by Trenton in the heart of COVID 2020 is nothing short of unethical. My parental rights have been violated and my children's innocence will soon follow if a change is not made. Having a teacher, an adult who is not my child's parents discussing genitalia with them up to the second grade is something I never thought that I would have to worry about in my lifetime. Having masturbation taught by a teacher in the 5th grade, it crosses a whole nother line. And then having an adult discuss sexual feelings and desires with 10, 11-year-olds, it's very alarming. And now it has been standardized. The discussion of hormone disruptors, anal and oral sex at 12 years old, my Lord, there is a time and a place for children to learn about these topics, and the ages set forth by Trenton are simply too young, let alone inappropriate. Yet our school districts are mandated to set these into motion. If they don't, they are receiving threats from the state. Why is this mandate being pushed so strongly? What is there to gain? How does this benefit the children? Why weren't parents involved in the creation of this agenda? Why was this agenda passed under the radar in June of 2020 without input? Interesting. Speaking of the agenda, I quickly learned that reading through course curriculums is not my forte. I hold my master's degree and I have an award-winning sales background, yet I struggle reading through the curriculum and the resources provided. The format and the lingo is simply not something that I am used to. If I am having a hard time with this part of the process, I am certain that other parents are also. At the minimum, parents need a comprehensive and easy to understand communication about what is about to be implemented into their children's education. Whether this is done in a letter, an information session, a video, there needs to be communication in layman's terms regarding what is to begin in the school for our children. This has been the forefront of conversation with parents for months. And to Charlotte's point, I can't tell you how many parents I have come across who have said to me, I'll get to it. I'll get to it. I'll get to it. I have faith in our educators. You have faith in our educators. Do you have faith in the politicians behind that about the new agenda that's coming down the pipeline? And getting to it, time is here. Next week, Ours in Emerson gets voted into place, the curriculum. I would hope that something that was implemented on a state level so that the parents who are too overwhelmed by the curriculum itself can truly understand what their children are signed up for, so that I and all parents can make a decision of whether or not we want to opt our children out of this, so that parents do not feel that their local school district is the one who has put this into place. More so than ever, parents and teachers need to be united, and this has certainly caused a feeling of disconnect from a parental level to a school level. We need to all work together for the benefit of our children. We cannot be scared by Trenton. My biggest fear is that having our children lose their innocence to these topics at such a young age will open Pandora's box. Grooming of children starts at a young age, as does this agenda. Interesting. Why are we normalizing inappropriate conversations between adults and children? How do we let our children know that it is inappropriate for an adult to even talk to you about your private area when it is being normalized at a school level by a trusted individual such as a teacher? In a co-ed environment, nonetheless. Not only have all parental rights been completely disregarded with the creation and implementation of this new sex ed curriculum, but this now puts all parents in a position to decide whether or not we need to teach our children about these topics before we, their parents, feel that they are ready. Whether or not we decide to opt our children out of the sex ed curriculum, the playground is a proverbial water cooler for elementary age students. Word gets around, and now that it will be taught by a teacher, there is no longer any kind of mystery or doubt to that word. It is fact to a child. In terms of parental rights, our hands are tied behind our backs, and we are watching our children go down a conveyor belt where they are being used as political pawns. It should be the parents' right to teach their children about these subjects until the children are at an age-appropriate level. We live in New Jersey, in a county with high-ranking school districts and some of the highest-paying taxes in the United States of America. Yet our rights of parents are where? Our children's rights to innocence is disregarded. A change needs to be made to protect our children. I would be more than happy to be a part of that change. Please help us make this change for our children, the ones that we have vowed to protect, that I have told them it is my job, my duty in life to protect them. To Senator Testa's point before, if a neighbor was to hand my child some of the material that you're finding in these course curriculums, if they were to do that, it would right away be vowed off as Megan's Law. A fun fact about my family is that my husband and I made a decision to move our family out of a town that we loved because we were living next door to a registered sex offender for child pornography. We uprooted our lives and we moved on over to Emerson. And I had that same anxiety-ridden feeling now. Every single time that this crosses my mind, as I used to have when we lived in our old house and I would go outside and I would see that man's car sitting in the driveway. This is not okay. Nothing about this is okay. And if it feels innately wrong, it's because it is. Thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. Last but not least, Dina Buccino. I'm saying you are from Woodcliff Lakes.
Yeah, I'm from Woodcliff Lakes. Good morning or afternoon now. My name is Dina Buccino. I live in Woodcliff Lakes. I moved to Woodcliff Lake 3 years ago for the school system. Our Board of Ed hired a diversity coach 2 years ago, and they had a Zoom meeting for the parents. The first thing said was the mistake teachers make is calling them boys and girls. They might not identify. We were also shown an empty boardroom and were told, I bet most of you would never picture a Black woman running this meeting. A parent asked, how do we reprogram the child if the parents don't think like us? And they told her to stay on the call after the meeting and they would discuss it. Pretty scary. My daughter had an assignment last year. She was 12. It was a transgender on video talking about the different sexes they can be. At the Board of Ed, the parents were told, sorry, the assignment was too advanced for your kids. Now on to the next agenda. I opted my daughter out of the health class, but found that they are putting it in other subjects when I saw her book she had to read for ELA. Totally Joe, who was wearing dresses at the age of 4 and has a crush on Colin. What does that have to do with English? I, as a parent, am against any teaching of sex, gay or straight, to young children. When the law was put into place, 18A35-435, it states the teaching should be put in the appropriate place, which means our Board of Ed can put it only in health and not in other subjects, and the child can opt out without penalty, but that's not happening. There are a large number of good bills, including the 3 Rs that are being introduced, but with a strong majority of Democrats in the New Jersey State Senate, I don't think that they would have a chance of passing this session. A bill I think may have a chance is the BA 370, which requires the public schools to post curriculum plans online and requires school districts to make textbooks or other materials used in implementing curriculum plans available for inspection by parents and legal guardians. I had to get it under 2 minutes, I thought.
Well, thank you. I'm sure there's going to be some follow-up questions. I just want to throw something out there and just get your response because I think it's important. Let's just break it down to rudimentary basis here. Who has your child's best interest in mind? When they're sick, who takes care of them? Who worries about them? Who plans out their life and their educational process? Is it you or the government?
Me.
Yes. Parent.
And how do you feel about the government superseding you now and telling you it's in their best interest that they should learn this subject matter no matter what age?
That at one point or another, it will be that before you decide with your husband or your partner, whoever it is, to adopt or conceive a child, I should send a letter to Trenton and say, are we in it together? Because it's becoming to that point that I don't know where else they're going to be satisfied. Let's say we all agree that this is hunky-dory and great. What's next? Because as the other panelists have shown, follow the buck. There's always money to be made. And unfortunately, as one of the panelists said, the retired teacher, we can all agree in most of New Jersey, 2 parents have to work. And if one parent has to work twice as hard. So the mind is incredibly busy. And just to give you an example, I'm doing this in between vacations and my husband having to run emails and has 2 little kids. I know Amanda's probably having, the background is crazy, and Dina, I can bet you're doing the same. You know, this is a distracted populace. Is the best way to pass all of this. And it's very disheartening. We bear the risk first. Like I said, September is around the corner.
To your point, Senator, to answer a question, Senator Panacchio, I feel like my hands are tied behind my back and I'm watching my kids go down a proverbial conveyor belt for a political agenda. They are going to mess up their minds at such an early age, something I've been trying to protect my children from forever. I learned a long time ago that those closest to you aren't always the safest. And this, it goes right against that. We're talking to children, or teachers are talking to children about things that teachers aren't necessarily taught to do. They did not go to college and have an education and a background in teaching 7-year-old about their genitals. Or if somebody sits there and says, you know, I'm not really too sure what gender that I am in the 5th grade, they're not a counselor. They're a teacher.
Right.
They're not a doctor. They're a teacher.
The 3 of you have put yourself in the spotlight. I just want to end with this before we take some other questions. You're in the spotlight. The governor has said that anybody that disagrees are partisan actors. We have the NJEA, you saw the video, you're called extremists. And we went to the Department of Education, their spokesman basically said that the concerns that you have are putting this, quote, in a dangerous place. So are you dangerous? Are you extremists? Are you partisan actors? I guess even a simple yes or no will do, just to get the record straight that we're not dealing with nefarious people over here, but rather with moms that are concerning and love their children.
I am not, but I take that like a badge of honor and I take it in the chin. That's just me.
I am not an extremist. I think they might want to look in the mirror instead of turning it around on other people.
That's right.
I'm not an extremist. I just am a parent who cares about the children, my children, and all the children in school. And I don't want to give up my rights to the government and this agenda that they have.
We all share that badge of honor. Senator Corrado?
Yeah, I just want to thank the panelists for being brave enough to stand up and speak out and, you know, really advocate for your kids. It's not always easy to put yourself out there. And it's a concern that we literally hear on a daily basis from parents all across the state of New Jersey. I don't care where I am, you know, where I could be food shopping and someone will come up and say, you know, bring it up. And we share your concerns. But you even mentioned people that don't necessarily feel comfortable coming going forward. And we hear from them too. They're concerned about repercussions to their children or even from the community. So I give you a lot of credit, and it becomes a full-time job, just, going through the curriculum and trying to figure out, and you are fierce warriors, and we're really proud of each one of you.
Thank you.
Senator Shapisi?
So coming from my district, thank you as well. And, I share as a mom, as somebody who has 2 full-time jobs, an 11-year-old and 18-year-old, and even being in government, there was a lot of stuff I wasn't aware of until the pandemic, until I had the opportunity to actually be home with my daughter, who was then a junior and senior in high school, and my son, who was in 3rd and 4th grade. And seeing firsthand, some of the messaging and how things have changed. And I think, to echo Senator Corrado's point, there are a lot of parents who have approached us, particularly parents from minority communities, who have expressed concern but are scared to publicly voice their concern because they don't want to be bullied or shut down or somehow, get reported or something like that. And so it's really important to hear different voices, to hear people's views, and in a respectful way as to what their concerns are. I have a lot of parents who ask, how do we stay on top of this? I have board members, even superintendents, saying the unintended consequences of something that may on its face sound like a good idea are having repercussions. And how do we follow it? How do we stay on top of it? And I think, as we saw during the pandemic, a lot of this stuff slips through because people aren't aware of it. So I tell everybody, go on to the njleg.org website, and you can take a look at the bills that have been sponsored. You can go up and look under education curriculum and see what's being sponsored. There's a whole host of bills coming down the pike that may or may not ever get heard, that further erode the parent-child relationship. There are bills that take away parents' rights to, if their child at the age of 13 wants to get treatment for mental health, the parents would no longer have access or the ability to communicate with the professional treating your 13-year-old child. And the age of consent would be deemed to now be 13 years of age. So these are things that all are kind of an interplay with what's going on in the schools, the attempt to take parents out of the equation, as well as, to put forth narratives that parents who are engaged and who do have concerns are somehow, some way a bad actor or, some plant or something. And so I really do applaud your tenacity, and I applaud and I encourage any parent who's listening to this, whether or not you agree or disagree, to keep engaged and understand, and don't allow yourselves to be silenced, because we need to be able to foster respectful discourse and dialogue on these topics without people feeling fearful to express an opinion.
Thank you, Senator. Senator Corrado, do you have any other questions?
No other questions.
Good. You have a closing statement, I believe, if I may.
I do.
30 seconds before we wrap this up.
Senator Panaccio, one thing I see, one of our panelists has her hand raised. Charlotte Kahn.
I'm going to keep it very brief. The only other thing that I encourage all of you as senators is that we as parents are looking at this at the long term and the immediate. September is around the corner. Not everyone is able to pull their kid out of their public school that they moved into to prevent this. Not everyone can homeschool it or send them to a parochial school if that's where their values mesh up better. there needs to be a legislation. Even I understand that this administration is no pro that, but just make the symbol, push it, put it in their face. We need it, because what I'm noticing is that the middle class is getting squeezed out of New Jersey, and the upper echelon that can send their kids all through private school or schools that welcome their values can do that. And let's make sure that New Jersey's not for the ultra rich and then whoever wants to just comply. That is my advocacy to all of you.
Cheryl, I don't want you for 1 second to think that we've just begun this conversation today. It was mentioned before.
I know. I
Committee
follow.
Fought against a recent bill that's up. I remember myself, and I don't think any Republicans had voted for the diversity and inclusion bill because of the unbiased, the unconscious bias that our kids have. We went as far as to even put an amendment in that bill that would have prevented kids 6 years and under from being taught anal, oral, and vaginal sex and not have any illustrations with it. And do you know that it was voted down? Something as simple as that. So
I know.
Just to show the absurdity of what's going on, but unfortunately, that absurdity is using our children as pawns. Again, I just want to, before I give it to Senator Carter, just thank everybody for their hard work and their efforts in joining us today. Hopefully, some people with a higher pay grade are listening, and perhaps we can get them involved too, and maybe we can change some of this nonsense that's going on. Senator Carter, would you wrap it up for us, please?
I want to thank Senator Panaccio for hosting this important hearing, and thank my colleagues, Senator Shapezi and Senator Testa, for being part of this, as well as thanking all who participated in our discussion on a topic that impacts the 1.28 million school children across the state of New Jersey. And during the pandemic, parents in the 40th district and from all across the state began voicing concerns about the new state learning standard requirements. And as I mentioned before, these are concerns we hear from parents on a daily basis about. Many, as you all are rightfully anxious, confused, and worried about the effects of these directives. And as a grandmother of a 2-month-old, a 5-year-old, and a 10-year-old, I share these concerns. Bureaucrats believe they know what is best for everyone. And I think we can all agree that every child is different. Education should never be one size fits all. Unfortunately, if a person disagrees with this, you are automatically now labeled as an extremist. New Jersey should be working to inspire parental participation, not trying to lock them out. Last year, I introduced the Parental Bill of Rights to empower parents, providing them with the fundamental right to engage in and direct their child's education. We need to be extremely cautious about what we're teaching 5, 6, and 7-year-olds. And the words we hear over and over again from parents are they want an age-appropriate curriculum. They want us to focus on fundamentals, and they want to ensure that learning loss is dealt with from the pandemic. We should never condemn the concerned parents of children. And I want all the parents that were here today to know that we hear you loud and clear. We're going to continue to fight for you, for your right to be a parent, to be involved in your child's education, and to be their advocate. So thank you to all of you for what you do.
Thank you.
And once again, thank you to all the participants today, and thank you to the viewing audience. Hopefully you found it insightful. Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you.